Oh, look, Murph, we're live again.
Yes, we are. It's nice being alive.
Yeah, I woke up on the right side of the grass this morning.
That's right.
So this is TSG Live Talking Trains. I'm John with my buddy Murph here. And, I'm supposed to let you say that, huh?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
We're good.
And we're going to talk about some train-related stuff today. I have a few housekeeping things I'd like to take care of first, though. And the most important one, and he's probably not even watching, but I'm going to say it anyway. Actually, both of these guys probably aren't watching because one of them is working right now and the other one I think is in New York. And it's happy birthday to our friends Paul Nolan, that I know it was his birthday yesterday. We know him on this channel really from the Fern Creek and Western Garden Railroad that we used to cover a lot on the channel. And our other friend Kevin Hill's birthday is tomorrow. And you might see, I think I just had an idea. What was that noise?
That was not you having an idea. That was...
is it your watch?
Yeah.
Telling you to stand up?
No, I did it, whatever that means.
Good job, Murph. Hey, he did it.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a great idea. Why don't we do, I'm going to see if I can do this. I have a banner for this. We're going to say, if we're going to celebrate Murph doing it, whatever it was, by making a donation to the channel.
It's usually me getting stand points for doing things like rolling over or looking up or something like that.
Well, you said that your watch was telling you to stand up when you were sleeping in bed and all you did was roll over. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I rolled over and it goes, "You did it." And I'm like, "Yes, I did." Yeah. So it's all good.
You did it, man. You rolled over.
It probably says something about my heart health, but we won't go into that.
Oh, well, I know that you have a good heart. I mean, you put up with me every month.
Yeah. Anyway, happy birthday to
Paul and Kevin.
Paul and Kevin. Yeah.
So cool. So I wanted to remember that. I even had a note. See, I did something right for a change. I had a note to remind me of something to talk about. And I also have something else that I want to talk about. Now, usually I don't do this because there's so many things that happen all the time that it's better for people just to look at their own area and do a Google search for, events in your area, right? True. That makes sense. But this time I have so many things that are happening that are kind of on our radar as far as Sydney and I will be looking at some of this stuff. We already have plans to be at some of these things. And this is what I'm talking about. And I'm going to make this screen bigger so people can actually see this. So this is the upcoming events, a one-off presentation. Right, we need to, here, let me see if I can.
Told John we needed theme music for this, but it never happened.
No, we have some theme music. Let's try this.
Okay.
Here we go.
Ooh.
Oh, that's too boring. Let's try this. Is this good?
Oh, it'll be good. It's going to move. Okay.
All right. Let's have the background music be the background. This is not what I had in mind. This is not very trainy.
Let's go to the events.
Okay, so on May 3rd, that's a Saturday, we have the West Side Reunion at Black Oak Casino in Tuolumne, California. And the West Side Reunion is, well, it's a lot of things, really. There are probably half a dozen presentations that are related to the West Side Lumber Company and other things, it might be logging in general.
Didn't you cover this last year?
Yeah, we've covered this a number of times, and I'll certainly be doing podcast segments about this when we're there. Right. And then that same weekend on the Sunday, May 4th, we have the Sierra Seminar, which is I'm not even sure if that's what it's still called these days, but it's another historic sort of event where they cover it. They do, presentations about all kinds of historical related stuff from Tuolumne County. And it's put on by the Tuolumne Historical Railroad Association, or THRA, which we are charter members of. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be drinking out of let me bring us back here, Murph.
Just to show off your
Just
mug.
to show off the mug. I'm drinking out of the Tuolumne his THRA mug, and it says on here, founding member, right? So that's one of those cool things that we got for joining the THRA when they started. But that's what the Sierra seminar is. And let me add this back on here. Then we also are going to have the O-Scale West, which is a really cool event where they have it's kind of like a swap meet, I guess, but it's tables, with vendors at the Hyatt Regency. But they also it's a multi-day event from the 23rd to the 25th. And they're going to be doing, let me turn this crappy music off.
Thank you.
It's starting to piss me off. But anyway, this is going to be the O-Scale West is going to also have layout open houses, and they're going to be, a lot of very important local layouts. Like I believe Jack Burgess is going to be open for this.
Wow.
Yep. So Yosemite Valley, O scale. It's not even a narrow gauge, but O-Scale West really focuses on S scale, O scale, and narrow gauge. But that doesn't mean that those are the only kinds of layouts they're going to have open. So this is going to be a really cool event. They do it every year, and this year's event is shaping up to be really good. We're also going to have that same weekend, the Best of the West out at Santa Margarita Ranch. I've done a video about the Best of the West event. That's something where the Santa Margarita Ranch, which is actually kind of a historic place because they have what they call a mission extension there that is usually open. And the mission extension is like one of those historic buildings that were built by the mission system, right? When the Catholic Church was colonizing, I guess, California. But it's a historic building. And in this case, it's in the confines of a big barn. So they're going to have that. Usually they have that open. They have the narrow gauge Pacific Coast Railroad open, which will be most likely running at least 2 different steam engines plus a diesel. That's how it was last year. And then what's also cool about this event is that they have all kinds of antique tractors. And so even some that are steam tractors. So it's a really cool event that has all kinds of interesting stuff to look at. It's stuff you don't see every day. So that's right up my alley. And then that same weekend, rail fair at Ardenwood Historic Farm. And I've also covered that here on the channel. So people can see videos about most of this stuff. The only thing that we haven't covered, but I think we're going to cover it this year, I don't know for sure. I'm still sort of in the planning stages for that, is O-Scale West. So anyway, those are some upcoming events that I thought were worth mentioning. And boy, I was just talking that whole time, and I'm not sure people heard us talking. Oh, good. Oh,
good.
man, because I thought I had removed us from the studio here. Anyway, so those are the events that are going to be happening, and we're looking forward to a lot of these. These are all worthwhile events, or else I wouldn't be sitting here, talking about them on a show. I wouldn't waste everybody's time with that. So anyway, we're going to talk about the organization of large photo collections, and I'm going to ask when we bring him on. Well, I'm going to ask it right now, and he can answer when he comes on. Well, actually, let me just bring him on and I'll ask him. We're talking to Mike Roque. Hi, Mike. Welcome back. Yeah, we just had you on last time, Mike, talking about train stuff.
Yeah, happy to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Train terminology last month. That was a really fun show.
That was fun. This
time, though, we're going to be talking about organizing large collections. In this case, I even made a ticker that I'm going to put on here that explains what it is. And I don't think I realized this, Mike. Your photo collection is in excess of 150,000 images. That's a lot of stuff. And any collection that's probably over 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000, I would think you need to organize if you ever want to find something, right? So we're going to be talking.
Me, pal. Yeah.
Right. So we're going to be talking about that. And I find it interesting because my video archive is easily up there, not 150,000, but there's a lot of clips, and
Mhm.
I might learn something about how to organize my videos better. So yeah, so this is your show, Mike. I mean, you're the one who's done this. I know you recently helped out organizing a collection of someone we know named Goofy Gary. And yeah, so take it away, man. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, sure. You're in the same boat, John. You have a massive collection of media that you need to organize so that you can find things, right? Whether you're talking about printed photos or video clips or railfan photography or books in a library, what we're really talking about is organizing collections of things, right? We have these massive collections, and whether you have 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 150,000 plus, it's very helpful to have some systematic way to do that, right? Imagine a library where it was just a pile of books and, hey, you want a particular book? Where is it? I don't know. Wouldn't work very well, right? Things need to be accessible. And I think probably for this audience, what we're thinking about most of the time is like railfan photography, right? You go out, you shoot some train somewhere, and over days and years, you amass a collection of stuff that either you shot that you want to be able to find, or maybe stuff that you've collected that other people shot that you want to make sure that you have a copy of, or people give you photos or whatever. But the traditional example is like family photos, right? You take photos throughout your life, and of course, before phones and everything, this wasn't such a massive task, right? Nobody shot tens of thousands of print photos of Christmas and Thanksgiving and whatnot. But now that we all have phones and cameras, multiple cameras, video cameras, right, GoPros, all types of things, we're creating all of this media, and it's very easy to just sort of throw it in a pile. And the traditional album, you stick it in an album and you put the binder in the closet, and then 50 years later you try to find stuff and you just can't find it. When you have a handful of photos, you can sort of be lazy about it. But when you're talking about 150,000 or something like the Library of Congress, you need a more extensible, comprehensive approach to organizing it. And that's what I was going to talk about today, was how I think about how to actually organize it. Obviously, you have to group your photos somehow and be able to find them. And the difference between the analog era and the digital era, fortunately, is that things are searchable, right? If we have information, we can use our software to find things, as opposed to, like, if you were doing printed photos, right? They have to physically be somewhere, like a library full of books, right? You got to put the book somewhere, right? And you have to be able to find that location again. So, you think about like the Dewey Decimal System, right? It's sort of a, 3 levels deep, I think it is, right? And you have a number for each thing, and, you can easily assign a number. Oh, I'm looking for medical textbooks. Oh yeah, that's 375, and 375 is over here. It's a pretty simple approach, and it works pretty well for small libraries. But when you get into something larger like the Library of Congress, and even larger collections where it's a more generalized collection of things with much more variation in the data, how do you organize that? So the Library of Congress does a little bit differently. And when you're talking about 150,000 photos, you've got to have something that works for you. Every system is a balance of simplicity and precision, right? You've got to have some way where any book in the library gets a Dewey Decimal number, right? But if you had 10 million books, right, what would that number tree look like, right? How do we organize the information that we use to organize the information? That's really where the work is how do we group the groups? How do we group the things that we label collections by? So fortunately, we have software to do that now, which makes it a lot easier. The real trick is labeling everything, right? We all know the railfan. Yeah, I've got 3,000 slides from 1968. None of them are labeled. I don't know where they are. I don't remember them anymore. Here you go. Have fun with this collection. A lot of times people die. That happens, right? Here's 20,000 photos. Some great railfan photographer shot that nobody has, and somebody's got to go through and not just physically scan it and collect it and preserve it, but then what is this? Where is it? How do I organize this, and how do we find it again once we've done that? That's what it's about.
What I'm thinking as you're talking, Mike, is it would be really smart for people before they do kick the bucket to organize their stuff, because Sydney and I, have scanned rather large to us photo collections, meaning 5,000 photos, and there's no information. So you're like, well, I think this is in Pocatello, but I'm not really sure, because that kind of bridge also is in Evanston, or Cheyenne, whatever. And if it's not like super specific, like, oh, there's only one bridge that looks like that, you may have to do some guesswork. And a lot of those were like that. A lot of those photos were just like, we have no idea where it is. We know it's a Union Pacific locomotive, but no clue about where it is. So what I'm thinking is, if your idea is to preserve history somehow, right, by having your photograph collection being donated to a historical society or the California State Railroad Museum, whatever, then they need to have that information. So this is going to be a great way to do that from the sounds of it.
Well, I hope so. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind from what you're saying is, discipline is important. The most important thing, before we get into the hows and the whats of it, the most important thing I think that people can do is to capture the information as soon as possible after you take a photograph, because even a week or two after you take some stuff, you can forget, where was that? What was that? Why did I take that? Blah, 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 blah. And, I'll make a little side point, like maybe take less photos. It's easy, especially with burst modes and cell phones now, to, hey, here's 50,000 images from a 5-minute span. Get rid of the stuff that you don't need, right? I mean, the tendency with digital is, well, just keep it. You can always throw it out later, but oftentimes later doesn't come. What happens between now and later is you forget why you shot it, what's in it, and then ultimately information is lost. And if you can't find the photo in your collection, or you can find it, but you don't know what it is or why you shot it or what's interesting about it, it's not really very valuable. So the key discipline to impart is, as soon as you shoot it, you've got to label it somehow. So like in the traditional analog, right, you get your slides back, label the slides right away before you forget. Take notes when you shoot them, label them when you go. For me, what I do is I try to dump my cameras frequently. I use a NAS, an offsite storage, and a variety of methods to physically store them. But the most important thing is, when you do that, right, first of all, you got to back it up so you don't lose it, right? Make a copy as soon as possible.
I have a question. You said you use an ass?
No,
Okay.
I use a NAS. I use a network attached hard drive. Yes.
I said it that way specifically because people watching, and myself included, what's a NAS? I don't know what that is.
I'm trying to, yeah. Well, it stands for network attached storage, but it's basically a hard drive on your network. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to get into the tech of it. I'm trying to focus on the discipline and the info, but yeah, network attached storage.
It's just not the same thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I basically use a network hard drive. In fact, you can see it here right behind me. It's on my network gear here. It's a little black box behind the antennas there.
Network attached storage. I'm saying, so when you say something like that, that's an acronym. Explain what it is, because I didn't know either. I mean, I figured it was something like that, but I didn't know what that meant. Straight off.
Well, it's just a hard drive on the network. But the reason I mention that is, the first thing is you need to make sure you don't lose it, right? If you keep it on, your phone, absent some kind of cloud backup, right? If you lose your phone, you lose the photo, right? If you lose your camera with the roll of film in it, you lose the photo, right? So, what I do as my process is to immediately back it up to my network. So I have at least 2 copies at all times, preferably 3. I have 2 copies on 2 hard drives here that are mirrored, and then I back that up off site as well. So, but the point is, label it when you do that, right? As soon as you take it off the camera or wherever you put it for permanent storage, like your archive, let's call it, you want to label it and make sure you capture that information. Now, the good news nowadays is, if you're shooting on any kind of digital camera at all, it's going to mark the date and time automatically, right? So we know at least when it is. And if you know when it is, if you knew nothing else about a photo, as long as you knew when it was, you could probably find it somewhat, right? So that's the good news. We don't have to, write down, hey, I took this photo on, April 25th or whatever day it was.
Something else to consider, though, Mike, I think, is that if you're using something like a DSLR that does not automatically update like your phone does, you want to make sure that your setting is correct, right? Because like whenever the time changes, we have our spring forward and fall back.
Yeah.
I always have to go to all 3 of my camcorders and fix it. And I have them side by side so they're as close as possible to each other, when I set the dates. I think that's important because there have been times when, sorry, I'm not trying to take over, but just mentioning something that dovetails off. Yeah, what you're talking about. I will definitely have to set the times on the cameras. And if we go traveling somewhere where it's a different time zone, I have to do the same thing to make sure that the time stamp that the device records on the media reflects, accurately what it was. So,
No, totally. I run into that as well. I mean, most new cameras now have, like, if you have a GoPro, you can use it on the app and you can just say, set the time. I think
yep.
some of them are even smarter than that now, which is nice. But yeah, that's part of the pre-work, right? Is before
Yeah.
you even go shoot it, make sure it's got the right time. I
Yeah. The
think,
drone also does that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So no matter what camera it comes from, right? You bring it down, you presumably, if you've done that well, you know what time, what day it was taken, right? What the date was and the time. Although when you're dealing with old print photographs, sometimes that's problematic, right? Old collections of analog stuff, if you're lucky, you might have the date or maybe the year, right? And of course, now our cell phones have it to the millisecond, but sometimes you don't have that. It's the older the photo, the more important that is to capture the date correctly. So yeah, that's just another aspect of recording the date correctly.
Yeah.
But
Some of those
I think
collections. Oh, some of those
no, go ahead.
collections I've mentioned that we've digitized for SBHRS, we're lucky, and they have information written on the back of the snapshot, or if it's sometimes the old slides have a date of when it was developed, right?
Yeah.
Now, the date when it was developed is not the date it was taken, but it's close.
But
Usually,
it's no newer than that date.
right.
That's what you run into with family collections. I had a pretty large collection of family photos. It was only a few thousand by comparison, but 1,000 photos with no dates on them is really fun to sift through. And I got pretty good at figuring out. That's one way you can figure it out is like in the '60s there was a particular type of photograph that a lot of people shot and got developed and would have the month and the year it was developed on the bottom. That makes it easy. After looking at thousands of these things, you can actually sort of figure out what decade it was just by looking at the image, the color, the tones. Obviously, the way people dress and hints in the photos will give you a lot as well. But the point here, from a discipline standpoint, is to capture that in the first place, right? There's various strategies to figure it out, but if we just wrote the damn date on the picture in the first place, we wouldn't have to talk about it, right? So I think the point I'm trying to drive home here is have that discipline in the first place. Don't let your photo collection pile up before you organize it. You have to organize it right away. And organizing it means
it's a Herculean task, right?
Right. The more you pile up, the harder it gets. And of course, human beings are really bad at that sort of thing. I'll deal with it later. And the next thing you know, you got thousands of photos that you shot on your phone and you dumped onto a hard drive. And now you don't know what the hell any of it is. And then you have to spend even more time doing it. It's a lot easier to do it. It's like getting the mail. If you wait for 6 months of mail to pile up, it's kind of a pain. 2-3 envelopes takes 2 seconds. Right? If it's 60,000 mail pieces that you haven't checked since the Nixon administration, it's going to be a little more difficult to deal with.
Right. I was going to procrastinate, but I'm just putting it off till tomorrow.
Yeah, well, there is a school of thought that says, discipline pays off later, procrastination pays off right now. That's true. I think that was a Stephen Wright joke, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean,
being lazy pays off immediately.
Yeah, you see what I did
there? Yeah, it's called teeing it up in the biz, I think.
So are you talking about putting the information in tags with the photo, or?
Well, let's talk about it. There's what information is it that we need to capture? And I think for every photo, you want a certain minimum set of information to describe the photo so that it's searchable, or to get real technical, selectivity, right? We want to be able to say, for any given photo, how can I find it efficiently and separate it from all the other photos? Well, obviously the date is probably the most important thing, I would think. Even if you knew nothing else about a photo, if you knew when it was taken, that can help you figure out other things if you don't. But you want to know, it's basically the who, what, when, where, and why, right? We want to know when it was taken. We want to know who took it. In other words, did I take it or did somebody else take it and give it to me? Right? My wife and I both shoot photos. I want to know, did I shoot it? Did she shoot it? Because sometimes it's like I'm looking for a particular photo. I don't remember who shot it, or maybe I remember, I shot it and she didn't. Well, I can cull out half the collection that way. Not that we shoot the same number of images, but it's a way to make it easier to find and winnow the collection, right? So, when it was taken, who took it, where it was taken is probably the next most important thing, especially you think about like railroad photographs, like you're saying, was this Evanston? Was this here? Was this there? Where was it? And as specifically as you can, or as specifically as matters, right? Sometimes specifically, and we're going to talk about tags here, but just as a side note, GPS helps with this, right? If your camera records GPS, your phone almost certainly does it. And a lot of DSLRs, most cameras now will do that in some way. That makes it easier, but I use the tag hierarchy, and we'll talk about that in a second. But from a general standpoint, we want to know where the picture was taken, right? What group of images does it belong to? In other words, what album do I put this in, right? So maybe if you're thinking about like family photos, well, maybe this is my kids, and maybe this was, my high school graduation, and maybe this was college or whatever, or this was some picnic at work or whatever. We've got to group these images on a given day or set of days. How do we relate a set of images together? That's what an album is, right? These images are this and not something else, and a way for me to say, okay, show me just that, right? So that's what I call an album, right? So we have the who, what, where, when, and why, right? The album is what it is, or sort of the group of things, really. The author, who shot it, right? The place where it was taken. And then we also have people and topics, right? So if I take a selfie of myself, I want to know me, Mike Roqué, was the guy this picture is, who's in this picture, right? And anybody else who might be in the picture, or if it's a picture related to somebody, right? It may not be you or somebody you know. Maybe, hey, here's a picture of, the president. Well, okay, I want to know that was that person, right? And any number of people. Here's a picture of my family. I want to know not only who's in the picture, but who is who, right? You might take old family photos from before you were born. There's 5 people in the photo. 5 people are in it, but which one is which person, right? So you want to know not only that a person is in the picture, but in the picture, where are they? Which person are they in the picture? We can dig into that a little bit later, but who's in the picture, right? If it's a picture of somebody or if it's related to somebody, you might want to know that. And then the topic, what's in the picture. So if it's a picture of a tree, it should be labeled somehow tree. If it's a picture of a cat, it should be cat. If there's a picture of a cat in the tree, the picture should have cat and tree, maybe, for example. And as we'll get into in a minute, the question is exactly what is that, right? What do I care about in the photo? And then how do I group those topics in a way that's sane, right? But again, those are kind of the things, when it was taken, what's in it, who's in it, where it was, who shot it, and why do I care? That's what the album is, right? It's my high school graduation. That's why I care. That's usually sort of what an album is. That's the basic information. And then as you get onto it with massive collections and different ways of grouping things, you might want to also have other things. Like I track contributors. So for example, our friend Gary, right? If Gary shoots some pictures and say, hey, here's a copy of some photos that I took, you want to know, hey, I didn't shoot that. Who gave those to me, right? In this case, Gary would be the author, but he'd also be the contributor. Sometimes somebody can give you a photo that they didn't shoot, right? So the contributor is the person who gave it to you, and the author is somebody else. Right? So the contributor and the author are not necessarily the same person. Secondarily, we might also want to know, okay, well, I have, a high school graduation picture and maybe a college graduation picture. Maybe I want to see all pictures of all graduations, right? So maybe I'll add, I call them views, but it's essentially a secondary album, right? Graduations, right? What type of event is it? It's a graduation. It's a birthday. It's this. Show me all birthdays for anybody in my family. Right? I don't have to go, okay, find every album that has birthday in it. Yeah, text search would work for that. But there are use cases where you might want to know, for example, I use one called highlights, where if there's a photo that's particularly interesting or it's a really specifically important event in my life that I might want to specifically note, I might mark it as a highlight. And then I can say, show me all highlights by year. So then I can look through, here's sort of the best of every year. That's a different thing than, hey, I shot a train, at Niles Canyon, like behind you there. Where it was and what album is might be Niles Canyon, but if it's particularly a special image, it might also belong to another album, right? The important thing is that we need to have at least one album, but we may have additional albums or groups of things that sort of, I don't want to use too big of a word here, but are sort of, orthogonal to the album, not about where it was. A highlight is not about where or what. That's sort of a theme, right? So you could think of it maybe as a theme or some other way of grouping it other than the primary album. So views and contributors are often some other things that I'll add. So how do we actually apply that, right? This is sort of the rubric, right? Like, okay, here's how I think about labeling any particular photo. Should have that information. How do we actually do it? Well, as we touched upon the date, right, when we're talking about digital photography, usually the date is embedded, right? So you shoot it with the camera puts data in the image called metadata, data about data. And it'll say, okay, it was this date and this time, maybe it's GPS too, but when it was taken is usually taken care of for us as we shoot new digital stuff. But all the other things, we have to somehow label those files with it. We have to put that information in the file. And one of the best ways to do that are tags. What is a tag, right? A tag is basically a label on a photo. Labels some aspect of a photo. As we talked about, it might be the place. I might label it Sacramento, for example. That tells me the photo was taken in Sacramento. Or I might label it, John A. It's a picture with John A in it. Or cat. It's got a picture. It's got a cat in it, right? So tags are, we can have, any number of tags for a particular photo, right? Each photo can have any number of tags. And of course, the tag can belong to many different photos, right? So it's a really powerful, expandable way for us to describe things. So we can take each photo and say, okay, this is what describes this photo, and then use tags to browse or search our collection, right? If I say, show me every picture that has the tag, Sacramento in it, it's going to be every picture that was taken in Sacramento, or every picture with a cat in it, or with John A in it, or whatever it might be. And so the real question gets to be, how do we structure those tags? How do we structure and organize the tags themselves? How do we think about what a tag actually is? And as we talked about before, well, a tag might describe a place. Well, how do you organize a group of place tags? Well, places are hierarchical by nature, right? And tags in general, I think, are hierarchical in nature. So for example, California is within the United States, right? Sacramento is within California. So your tag hierarchy might be USA, California, Sacramento. And the reason that's important is because, well, what if we need to add a new state? Let's say I go to Reno and I take a picture in Reno. Well, now I need USA, Nevada, Reno, right? It's an open-ended way for us to describe information. And if we have a sane way of grouping those tags, it makes it real easy not only to apply the tags, goes back to the discipline, right? We got to make it easy. Right? If it takes you an hour to tag every photo up, that's not very efficient. We need to be able to find, okay, place, where was it? Pick the appropriate tag for where it is. And then with the appropriate level of specificity. Maybe I only care that it was in Nevada. Maybe I took a trip to Idaho and I only went there once. Okay, just tag it Idaho. I don't care that it was, whatever city in Idaho. I went a couple of places, but it's all Idaho. That's fine. I find this for like international travel. Right? If you go to some other country, like I don't need to record every city and address at every photo that I took. Spain's good enough, right? Whatever it might be. But how do we organize those tags is the question. Well, place is pretty easy. Place is hierarchical because every place is within some larger place, right? We live in 3 dimensions. It's pretty easy, right? I usually structure tags, place tags by the political divisions, what country, what state, so on and so forth. And then you can make it as deep and specific as you need. But place is pretty easy. What gets really complicated is albums and topics, because sometimes what you find is they're actually not, you can have albums and topics with the same names, but they really mean 2 different things. For example, if I volunteer at Niles Canyon Railway, which I did for many years, and I take a photo at Brightside Yard, the album is going to be Niles Canyon Railway. But the place might also be Niles Canyon Railway, right? It might be USA, California, Niles Canyon Railway, for example, or Brightside Yard or whatever. But you have to understand the semantics of where it was at that railroad is not necessarily the same thing of why I care. Me volunteering there is the album. The fact that it was taken there is the place, right? And this gets really wonky with topics because, you might have a place that has an album, a topic, and a place with the same name. Your Model Railroad Club, for example, right? The actual clubhouse where your layout is, where your club is, you might actually call the name of the club, but that's different than the organization, the group, the actual album, let's say. So it gets really sort of dicey. The real trick with all this stuff is to come up with a structure that makes sense to you and still fulfills all the rules, captures all the information, and makes it easy to search and browse your collection. And that's really the art of it, right? Is finding a way that balances what makes sense to you and what is also extensible and captures all the information and makes your collection accessible.
did you see the question at the bottom that Sydney's posting?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So the question is about naming the photo, the file name versus metadata in the file, and that's a great question. Thank you. There are really two different things. I read an article on the internet of some guy who had a really, he would say, well thought out approach to using the file name to capture information. But really what the file name is an identifier. So to give you the short answer, no, don't put the information in the file name. And there's an asterisk on that, and I'll get into that in just a second. But what a file name needs to be is just unique. In other words, every photo is unique, and it must have an identifier that is not the same as some other photo, right? It's sort of like your social security number. No two people should have the same social security number. It's a unique identifier, and that's what your file name is. So there's a whole other convention. I wasn't really going to get into this, but since you asked, I'll mention it. The file name is basically, what I do for file names is I name it with what I call the collection, which is essentially the author or some label of the group of photos, and then a date, the year, month, and date of the photo. And generally speaking, unless you shoot 300 photos in the same second, that's usually enough, right? In other words, you need year, month, date, and time, or some specific. Usually what I use is just a sequence number. So like if I take 10 photos today on April 16th, the file names might be Roqué underscore 2025 04 16 underscore 001 002, so on and so forth. So every photo that I take gets the date string and then an index, a number after it to uniquely identify it on that day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, presumably those would be sequential though, right? So the first photo you took would be the 001, right?
Presumably, but not necessarily, because again, the date is in the file itself. That's a metadata tag in the file. We don't need to, we're not using the date in this context to say, okay, here we're going to search for file names to find out what date it was taken. That just enforces the uniqueness of the file name, because two photos cannot be taken at the same exact moment, right? If I take a photo at 4:38 and 4:39, if I use year, month, date, hour, and minute, then it will have a unique name. But if you only use the date, you need some other piece of information to make them unique. So it could be sequential, but as long as they're unique, it doesn't matter whether it's random, sequential, or anything. We could talk about hashing and all types of other nerdy things. But yes, generally speaking, it's sequential because that just makes sense. The real issue you run into when you have multiple cameras and multiple collections of photos and things is sometimes file names will collide. Like let's say you and I, John, go buy the same GoPro camera and we shoot 10 photos today. Those photos are going to have the same 10 file names. How do I tell them apart, right? So if one of them says Mike Roqué and the date and the number, and one says John A and the date and the number, then they're unique. So that's what it's about. What you want is every file name to be unique. And, maybe secondarily, you could argue if you totally lost all your metadata for whatever reason, you would at least still have whose it was and what date it was, and you might be able to find things in a sort of, apocalypse type of situation. But what's important is two things. File names need to be unique, and then the information about them you want to put into tags or other things. Like dates are not exactly tags, but they're stored within the metadata of the file. What you want is every file to be self-descriptive. Because in the past, what you would have, and this is still true to some degree, is, you have some photo management software or some database, which basically says, okay, file number 1, here's the information. File number 2, here's the information. Well, if you lose the database and you just have the files, now you've lost everything about your photos. With most modern cameras today, they embed that information in the file, and then the database just sort of keeps track of it. But the information is stored with each image. That's what you want. You want portability. There's a larger concept to talk about getting locked into software. A lot of Google Picasso people are cringing right now, and Windows Live Photo Gallery, which I have a lot of experience with. You lock into some system and then the vendor disappears, and now your photo collection is maybe not accessible, or maybe you lose the information, or you can't add to it, or whatever. So the file names are about uniqueness. The tags and the other metadata are about describing the image. The reason I focus on tags is because, again, the date we generally get for free. The camera kind of does that. But we need to tell it everything that the file doesn't already know, where it is, who shot it, or whatever else we want to keep track of it. So, yeah, good question. You definitely want to use tags, and there's other metadata like descriptions and captions that you can put in the image. You can have a long, here's a photo of Mike and John A at Brightside on TSG Live. That could be in a caption, but that would be in the metadata in the file. Obviously, you couldn't store that in the file name. It'd be too long, right? The file name is about identification. The metadata is about description.
There's another question. There's another one already poking its little head up, which is, are you doing the tags for yourself or making it easy for other people to find it later?
Yes.
Right? It's both, right? I mean,
it's both, yeah.
But wouldn't someone kind of have to know what your system was in order to find it? Or I guess they could just search an entire drive, right, for some keyword, and it would pop up if you did your due diligence when you named it and entered your additional data, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's why I want to talk about tags, because it should be self-descriptive. And I would argue that if it's worth shooting, it's probably worth shooting for somebody else, right? Like, let's say you're taking family photos. Well, if you have children or other family members, one day you're going to die. They might want to see those photos, right? Your kids might want to see photos after you're gone, for example. So you want to have that metadata such that if you were to look at the files and look at the metadata, it would be obvious what the system is, right? It's just like Dewey Decimal. Here's the system, right? If we know how the system works, then we can look at any book and look at the code and know, okay, it's this group, so on and so forth. So it should be self-descriptive. And, it's up to you if you don't care. I'm not here to tell you that everybody's photos are important for the posterity of the world, but if it's worth keeping, it's probably worth labeling and organizing in a way that others can find.
Yeah. And in the context of the topic that we're really discussing here today, because it's a train show,
right?
Talking trains, you may have some really cool photos of a one-off event that could never be repeated for whatever reason, that somebody inherits this collection and they're like, gee, I wonder if he had any pictures of that time when the 2472 ran Miles Canyon, for example, right?
Yeah.
That'll never happen again.
Right.
And that would be a good way to find it. Question though, and some people watching might be thinking this, which is you need, in order to change metadata or add tags and all that stuff, you need to know where you find that stuff within the picture, right? So like on my Mac, I think I can right click any picture and ask for more information, and it opens up a queue or a box that says where you can enter stuff into it. Is that where you would enter your tags?
That's one way you can do it. We could talk for an hour about the technical side of actually doing this. And Murph and I touched on this a couple of weeks ago. It turns out that there's not sort of one way of doing it. And there's really no one piece of software that does everything perfectly. Although I would argue Windows Photo Gallery did it pretty well. It's end of life. It's been gone for 10 years. I'm still using it because it's the best thing that I have found and it still runs. But if it were to go away tomorrow, the tag data that's in my photos would still make it searchable. So how you choose to do it is sort of a personal choice. But maybe we should approach it this way. What a lot of professionals use is Adobe Lightroom, right? Adobe Lightroom is probably the leading paid photo organizer out there. And it does things a certain way. It uses standards and it's pretty good, although it does a few things the Adobe way. But that's kind of the paid solution that a lot of people use. But if you store the data in your files in a standard way, there's IPTC and EXIF and a variety of different ways of storing different pieces of information. People, so forth. There's a couple different ways to tag people in photos. If you use any standardized way of doing it and you're consistent about it, you can use pretty much any tool that can read that data. The problem is each system does it a little differently. The way your Mac does it, the way Windows does it, the way Photo Gallery does it, Picasa does it, and another one that's out there that's open source called Digicam with a K, Digikam. Digikam is an open source package of software that's designed to do that well. Use standards, and it's open source, so it's not tied to some vendor like Microsoft who might decide tomorrow we don't care about this anymore and leave all us Windows Live Photo Gallery people, adrift. But I'm not bitter. But
you don't sound like it matters to you at all.
And even more, your tag names have to be consistent. And the labels you use for certain things should probably be consistent as well. If you're talking about these are pictures of Union Pacific, don't all of a sudden start calling it UP instead, unless you like doing those searches.
Right. Well, and that's I think the main thrust of what I wanted to talk about today was what's the best way to actually describe it. I could talk for hours, and apparently my cat could talk for hours as well about the various tech of it. I want to try and keep it sort of abstract to your point there. Like the way I organize my railroad stuff is I want to know where it was, meaning where on the railroad it was. So let's say I take a picture at the depot in Sacramento, right? Well, it's Sacramento. That's the place in terms of geography. But where on the railroad is it? It's the Martinez sub of the Union Pacific, right? So railroad photos have additional place information, if you want to say it that way, right? Where it was is Sacramento, but where it was on the railroad was the Martinez sub, maybe a milepost if you want, right? Now, what I don't do is market Martinez sub Sacramento and USA California Sacramento, because I already know where it is, right? I ran into this a lot when I was taking photos of back east. I grew up on a commuter railroad. So, I lived in a town called Fleetwood, which is the name of my town, but there's also a station called Fleetwood on the Harlem line, right? So what I used to originally do was tag at Harlem line Fleetwood, right? And not the place, because generally speaking, if the name is the same, you kind of know where it is. But the station, the place on the railroad, the station, like in the railroad sense of a timetable station, a location, a named location, is the same as the town, but that doesn't mean it's semantically the same thing, right? So again, the key things are the where, right? Sacramento is the where, but if it's a railroad photo, additionally, I want to know where on the railroad it was, what subdivision, which railroad. An interesting side note of that too is what happens when you have, like on Metro North back east, used to be the New York Central. Well, if it's a photo from the 50s, it would have been New York Central Harlem line or Harlem Division, I think they would have called it back then. Now it's Metro North. Now, the short answer is I just call it Metro North because that's what it is now, and it makes it a lot easier than having two separate trees for when the railroads changed over. But that's not why you call. The important thing is, yes, for railroad stuff, you want to have additional things. So you might want to know like a topic. Okay, if it's got the 2472 in it, I have, what I call a reporting mark, which is a unique identifier for a piece of equipment. So it would have topic, trains, reporting mark, SP 2472. And then I could search that tag, show me all photos that have that tag. That's everything with 2472 in it. So also 2472 at Niles Canyon. There you go, right? All photos I have at 2472 at Niles Canyon, of which I have a few. But that's a great point. There's additional information depending on sort of I don't want to use the term collection, but sort of the realm of photos that we're taking. So for example, if I take pictures of model railroading of somebody's layout, I don't really care about the place, right? I mean, maybe, yeah, I care that the person's layout is in whatever town it's in, but what I really care about is which layout it is and who owns the layout.
At the same time, if we're talking about Seth Newman's Niles Canyon layout,
right?
Well, it kind of matters, but that's why, as you were saying earlier, your main topic is railroad. The second one is probably either model or prototype.
Well, maybe I don't need to mark whether it's a model or prototype. I know from the metadata, I can infer that, right? I never want to record data that I can infer from other data, right? So like the date, for example, you see this a lot. People do this on social media. They'll shoot a bunch of photos in January and then they'll post an album to Facebook or whatever. And they'll go January photos, January 2025. Well, I don't care when it was taken. The photos tell me when it's taken. What is the album, right?
Right.
You wouldn't label your family photos by the date. Here's photos from November. I don't care about that. I want Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday, whatever it is, right? So what you want is to have tags that describe the image in a way that you would either browse or search for it, right? And again, the date we already know, so we don't need a tag for the date. We don't need a tag of an album of photos from January 2025. We know that from the metadata. We can search for that. Right? What we want is information that's relevant to the photo. So if it's a layout, I have a whole tree of this is where you get into the album naming conventions, right? So for me, anything that I take a photo of, right, belongs to some area of my life. You've got to have some way of broadly categorizing things. And I thought a long time about this, but what I basically came up with was anything that I take a photo of is either maybe family, right? Friends, work, a hobby, an event. Maybe I went to a concert. That would be an event, right? an activity, something I just do in general, like maybe pictures of my cat around the house. I have an album called Around the House, and that's an activity, right? Stuff that's around the house.
Would that be
Travel.
the cat that was letting her feelings be known a little while ago?
Yes, that was my very talkative cat who doesn't understand it's not her show. Yeah. um, but I'm just saying, like, if you take any album of photos, Christmas, last year, or some high school graduation, or I went to a concert, right? Where you put the tag, the album, how do you group albums, right? And so I tried to come up with a structure. Think of it as like a collection of buckets where an album goes in one and only one bucket. It's a category for the album, right? And this is where it gets sort of 3D chess, right? It's like, okay, what do I name the album? But then how do I group other albums like it, right? So like I don't, if I take pictures every Christmas, I don't do an album for every holiday every year. I don't do Christmas 24, Christmas 25, whatever. I just label it album activity, or actually album event holiday Christmas. I know by the date in the files what year it was. If I want to see Christmas for 2024, show me Christmas album, date is 2024, right? That sort of thing. That's what I mean about not recording what we already know. We already know the date, so I don't need to put a tag that duplicates the date, right? But the point at hand is, how do we group albums? How do we organize albums? And what you want is a category, which means that for any given album, it belongs in only one category. It's either an activity or it's travel, right? If I travel somewhere, like, I go to Europe or something, I go to Italy, that's travel, right? If I go to Reno, is that travel? Well, yeah, it's out of town, right? But if I go across town to, say, Davis, which is near Sacramento, if you're out of the area, well, that's not really travel. That's sort of an activity. That's a local activity, right? If I go out to a bar to celebrate my friend's birthday, well, that's not travel, right? That's an event. What's the most important thing such that an album belongs in only one category? This is really the meat of what I wanted to talk about here. How do you group albums? And that's what I came up with is, activities, events, family, friends, and work, travel, school. So for example, you might have, old school portraits, right? You all sit in the room and they take the picture of you, right? Where would you put those? Well, I put each one of those into an album for the school that it belonged to. I call those school portraits, right? And that goes under album, school, and whatever school it might be. Actually, that's a view. That's a secondary album. But the point is, you need some sane way for any given collection of photos, what the primary album is. How do I think of that? So for my Railfan stuff, it goes under album, hobby. I call it railroad history. So if I'm out taking pictures of the prototype, right, that might be album, hobby, railroad history, Niles Canyon, right? If I'm just rail fanning it, right? Now, if I'm volunteering there, it would be album, hobby, railroad preservation, Niles Canyon, which I happen to volunteer there. I volunteered at other places. That's how I group it. And what's really powerful about that is you can say, show me just that. Show me every album under railroad preservation, shows me every railroad I've ever volunteered at and every photo there, versus say railroad preservation, show me all my Railfan photography that I've ever taken that's not that, right? So at some point you have to balance those two things, right? Because if we make it really abstract, it gets to be so, sort of nerdy that you can't find anything. And if you make it too specific, then you come up with something new and it doesn't work with your system. Right? That's the Library of Congress versus the Dewey Decimal System, right? The Dewey Decimal System is meant to be simple and easy for small libraries. Library of Congress's system is meant for an even much larger collection, with a much broader way of grouping things. But if you get too abstract, you can't use it. If you get too specific, it just breaks down and it doesn't really serve your needs of browsing and searching in a way that makes sense. So this is what works for me. The key thing here is to illustrate the concept so you can come up with your own way of grouping things. But I think most of us have probably similar ways of thinking about most things, right? It's either work or it's not, right? It's either family or it's not. It's either an event like a concert I went into or some fair or something, or it's not. The key is having a sane way of grouping it so that it falls into only one. That's the key point. Easier said than done. Yeah.
It's a lot to digest, really. I mean, like, for example, I have a fairly large archive of video footage that I've been taking since 2005. And so, you know, I have drives and then backup drives of those drives. And I should store some of it offsite. I have everything here, which is a huge mistake, and I realize that. We're talking about organizing it, and I just have each archive drive is a year, which requires me to remember what year I did something, because I don't have one of those, you know, huge docs that lets you put like 10 archive drives all at the same time. I should probably get one of those too, because it would make making videos a lot easier. Because I sometimes I have a dock that holds 2 drives. And if I have to access video footage from 5 different years, I'm having to hot swap drives and then move it onto a local drive so that I can use it at the same time as I'm rendering my stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, because Final Cut Pro won't, if it's not present, it says, hey, where's the media when I go to put it into my timeline. So it's kind of, I kind of made it hard on myself. But the other thing is not having the full archive accessible on one big dock also makes it hard, because I have to remember what year stuff was in. So I'm thinking about how I've organized my stuff, and so far it hasn't been too hard. Like, I usually remember, oh well, I went and did Virginia and Truckee in 2017. I remember it because of other things that happened around that time. But for me, like an event that I go do, I just name it with the date first. You know, January 17th, 2026 would be 01/17/26. And then every event goes into a folder that's named by the date. And sadly, the stuff that's on there is all done with just numbers. They're sequential numbers, so they're in order if you sort it that way, but it doesn't tell you anything about what it is. I don't just put the date. I put the date and then I name it something like, so 01/17/26, you know, Niles Canyon foaming or whatever, you know, chasing trains, right? Because maybe we're chasing trains that day and I did a chasing trains episode that day, just as an example. So it still works, but it's not really quite as searchable, because I'm not using standardized names for, you know, what the event was, like you're talking about. So you're giving me a lot to think about how to organize my own stuff. And I don't know, it might be harder to do with videos, just because I'm not even sure you can access as much of that meta stuff. And I just haven't really looked at it. You know, like I haven't right-clicked on a video to see what options there are to add tags or whatever. Yeah. So it's just giving me a lot to think about.
Part of your problem, though, how many terabytes of video do you think you have?
A lot. It's in the dozens easily.
Somewhere between, way too much and not enough.
Yeah, somewhere between way too much and way more than you'd ever need. You know, right. I mean, it's each year is either a 4 or 6 terabyte drive. And when you have multiple years, it adds up really fast. So,
well, couple issues, and you know, we can do therapy afterwards, John. I'm hearing some things.
I might need that.
Yeah, I can help you out, buddy. No, I mean, there's
wine first.
there's the tech side of it, right? How do we physically store this stuff? And you know, I think that's sort of maybe beyond the scope here. Although I would argue that what you want is one big volume, right?
Yeah, and, it's very related, though. It may be beyond the scope. It's very related because if you don't have a place to put all this crap, there's no sense in trying to make it searchable, right?
Part of the good news is that this was a real issue 10 years ago. And now you can actually buy drives or drive systems that could actually conceivably hold that in one volume.
Right.
Well, so that's what a NAS is. Yeah, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That part of it isn't insurmountable. The question is, how do you form an indexing system, which sounds like Mike has some hints to be able to actually do that. Take it away, Mike.
Well, right. That's the problem with using files and folders, because a file can only belong to one folder. Right. That's the reason we use tags, is because it's what database nerds like me would call a many-to-many relationship.
Well, right. But what you're saying is only true if you don't duplicate it, because you could put it in 2 folders. You just have to duplicate it. Now you need twice as much space, which in my case, we're dealing with 4K ultra high definition video. that adds up to a lot of space really fast.
Wait till I tell you about symlinks.
Oh, this must be some computer nerd stuff.
This is going to turn into a Linux geek out, Murph. We got to keep it sane here for the
Okay.
normal people. I
I'll
would
get
love to do
quiet.
that with you. We could do that after John's therapy, although I'm going to have to check my calendar after that. But but I just want to push back a little bit, John. Yeah, you said you can duplicate it, but each one can only be in one folder at a time. You can't have the same file in multiple folders. Yes, Murph, we can have symlinks and have shortcuts in Windows. But the
hold on a second, though.
Yeah,
Mike, I can do that. I can create. Or are you saying one of them is a duplicate? Is that what you're saying? Like that's,
right. It's not the same file then. If you've copied the video, each video is in one and only one folder. That's what a folder is, right? It's like a file cabinet. You can't put a piece of paper in two different folders in your file cabinet, right? It has to be in folder A or folder B, right?
You're confusing me. Are you saying that because I can shoot a video right now on the camera that we're using to do this show, and it'll be on the video will be on my little card, and it will be, whatever MTL 001 or whatever protocol the camera uses.
Mm-hmm.
And I can put that on my computer here in 7 different folders. So the file, it's 7. Are you saying that it's
copy it into 7 folders, but you can't have the same file in multiple folders? That's what a file is, right?
But it is the same file because it's not named different.
It's a copy of the original.
It's a copy of the file.
Okay, so what you're saying, it's semantics here. So what you're saying is,
yes,
that's not the original. Okay, that's all I was trying to clear up.
Let's use a file cabinet analogy because I think it's a little simpler. You take a piece of paper, right? You can only put that piece of paper in one folder, right? You can't put the same piece of paper in 2 different folders, right?
Sure. Okay, I'll go along with that.
So that's the problem with organizing your digital files by folders as the primary way of capturing when it was taken, where it is, what it is, because we have more than one piece of information, right? I actually used to do it that way when I first started digital stuff. I used to group it by the date it was taken because I figured every photo can only be taken at one time, right? At any given moment, right? A photo it belongs to one moment or other. So what that means is that you'll never have multiple files that land in the same folder, right? But the real problem is how do we capture all that other information beyond when it was taken? So the way I group my files on the disk now is still by date. I have folder, year, and in some cases month, I think is how I do it, and then a pile of photos that are taken that month. The problem with file systems on computers, most computers, Windows and Mac, is that it uses the skeuomorphism of a file cabinet. It uses the idiom of a file cabinet in that a piece of paper goes in a folder goes in a drawer, right? Meaning a file goes in a folder. We have that same analogy with our file systems. But when we're talking about capturing more information, right, we can't just use that because there will be a necessarily loss of information. It's like you said, if I want to know, go find something that I shot on the V&T, I need to know the year it was taken. Well, if you forget that or you die, now we don't know that. Whereas if I have it in my system tagged by the railroad and where and all the things we talked about earlier, then anybody can find it because the information is self-descriptive. Your system is based on the idea that you will have an additional piece of knowledge to help you find the folder in which the file belongs. What I'm suggesting and what most, think about like a TV station or a production company that makes movies, right? They got all this video and all these different things. It has to be findable. It has to be searchable, browsable, and accessible, let's say, generally. So you need a systematic approach for describing those things. And with video, it's no different than still photos. You can embed metadata and do that. The issue is not the mechanics of how we embed the metadata. The issue, at least as far as what I was going to talk about, was how do we actually describe it? It's a layer of abstraction above that. So we can talk about how to physically put it on drives and make it accessible on the network and volumes and nerdy things like symlinks and really, really nerdy things if you want to get down that road about the format of how it's actually done. What I'm talking about is how do we do it? Think about it like photos and albums on the bookshelf, right? A photo can only go on one album, right? That album can only go on one shelf. How do we group those things? And that brings us back to Dewey Decimal and those other things. But the beauty of digital information and tags is we have that many-to-many relationship, right? I might have many photos of the 2472, right? And the 2472 might be in multiple albums. I might have shot it in many different contexts, right? So what tags do is they allow us to describe that stuff in that open-ended way. And what that really gives us later on is searchability. Again, the whole idea is to make this stuff accessible. If we shot all this stuff and described it and never looked at it again, what would it matter how we label it, right? The whole point of all this is so that we can find something later. And not just us. Maybe we're dead and it's somebody else. Maybe we give our collection to, somebody like Center for Railroad Photography and Art, and they put it in their collection. They need some way of organizing it into whatever system they use, right? A lot of folks, don't think about this until they're dead. But like you shoot a lot of great stuff. Well, now you're dead and your collection of all this great stuff is effectively inaccessible, right? So, there was, I think somebody asked a question earlier about, well, should we even label it at all? Well, if you need to find it, you have to. And if you want others to be able to find it when you're gone and you forgot what year you shot the V&T in, you better have some way of doing it that will survive you. We could go really nerdy on, a lot of people used to put stuff on CDs back in the day, and now those are starting to physically degrade. File formats is an issue. There's a lot of tech of it. But the key thing first is we've got to have some information. Do the best you can until you know better, and then do better is the broad philosophical point I would make.
Honestly, if you have a question about whether you should tag it, if you're just doing it for yourself, if you've ever talked to somebody and said, oh, I've got a picture of that here, and you're looking through this scrolling mess of goo for the right possible image to pop up, yeah, you wish you had tags.
You couldn't see it, but he was scrolling on his phone
through my photos. And I've done this. I did this last weekend. I took pictures of this model back in 2013. Well, I could kind of narrow it to 2013. Then I'm scrolling through a year. That's all. Yeah,
it's just
not organized.
Right. It's the wrong way to approach the problem. What we want is the information, not information that we need to know another piece of information together with to find it. And that's the problem with organizing photos by date. Like I said, I have 160,000 photos in my collection. There's no way I could browse that, even if it was by year, to find something. But because I have it tagged and organized in a way that is selective, right? It's very easy for me to search and browse the collection. I can find any photo that I know I have, and even if I don't know I have it, and that's the problem you get into after a certain period of time, you start forgetting what you got. And you go, hey, did I ever shoot this here on this day, or did I ever shoot this at all? And you just search for it. You can do text search. You can browse your tag tree, that sort of thing. There's a million different ways you can sift through the data, but we've got to create that data in the first place. And the more you shoot, the larger your collection is, the more disciplined and organized you have to be about providing that data.
And I would argue that the more important it is to do it, right? If you have a huge collection, because like you were saying, right. I mean, you might forget that you shot 844 in Niles Canyon, just as an example. Like they had some meet up with some, I think 2472 was one of the engines that met with 844 over there at Hearst or wherever it was. Maybe you forgot you were there, but it happened.
Right.
You could just go
844, 2472, and there it pops up.
Sure. Or even just 844, and it will show you all the places. If you haven't shot it in a million places, that could narrow it down enough, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah, that's really something to think about, because especially with as much. Sorry, I'm thinking of how I can use this now, because
I can see the wheels turning, John. I've been seeing it. I've been watching it for 2-3 minutes now. I'm like,
but the whole problem for me now is I'm that idiot who didn't organize stuff in the first place, and it would be a lot of work to go back now and start. I better get started tonight. I might get done in a year or two if I get started tonight with all the crap in my archives.
Well, that's the old thing about how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
Yeah.
I'll do you one better. Best day was yesterday. Next best day is today. But, the key thing I would say, John, to that is do something, because even if you have, just some basic stuff. I mean, we talked kind of about the 5 things, but just date and some broad label, the year and it was V&T, the year and it was this. That's pretty easy to do, right? And if you've already got it in folders and things, you've got some organization.
I already have that. I just don't have it in tags or whatever. So that's the part.
Well, you don't have it in a way that's searchable and browsable. That's the thing. You can only browse by date, right?
Well, it's searchable in a sense, because I use Macs, okay, and the
Yeah, you
Mac,
could search the files. Yeah.
yeah, every Mac has a little magnifying glass up at the top right corner, and as long as I have the correct archive drive stuck in my dock, then I can search for it, and I can search for it on that archive drive.
If it's information that's available just on the native tags that come in or the title that you have, but there
Right.
might, as Mike is pointing out, there is extraneous information that would be nice to have available by tags, like who was there.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
You know, the event that was taking place that may or may not be in part of the title, and so that's
Well,
the important bit.
Well, and also don't forget that sometimes things have the same name, but they have different semantic meanings. Like
Like
I mentioned earlier, Niles Canyon Railway, me volunteering there is one thing, the place is something else. In other words, the organization, right? So, for example, I might have some, like their logo, for example. I did their website and some other things, right? So I might have an image of their logo. Well, that's not me volunteering there. That is something associated with the abstract organization of Niles Canyon
Right.
Railroad, PLA or whatever, right? So sometimes just having two things with the same name might mean two different things in different contexts. And that's what tags and hierarchies allow us to do, is say, you know, this version of this text label means this versus this. Like I mentioned before, the location on the railroad, Sacramento on the Martinez sub, is not semantically the same thing as Sacramento, the city, right? It just happens to be the same label, but it doesn't mean the same thing. One means a place on a particular railroad, the Union Pacific's railroad. The other one means a particular place within a particular state in a particular country. And that's what I'm getting at with the tags. And so, yeah, John, I mean, I don't envy you if you got a pile of stuff that's not organized in some way and you've got it spread over a bunch of drives. How do you know which drive is which, right? I imagine, what do you do, by year till the drive fills up? Yeah.
It's by year, yeah. And now,
so
luckily, though, I'm going to say I was smart enough to make sure that each drive is the entire year. Like I would fill up a 4 terabyte drive and it's only September. I'm like, well, shoot, I got to get another, like a 6 terabyte drive, you know? So what I would do is I would start in on a second 4 terabyte drive. And then at the end of the year, see how much it all adds up to and get that size of terabyte drive and transfer it all to a single drive. So it's not, you know, 2022A and 2022B, because I don't want to do that. That's a whole different mess, right? You haven't split, because then you don't
right,
even,
because it's grouped by date. And that's the point, is we don't want to tie it that way. That's a physical manifestation of what I'm talking about. You know, I use a network drive here, which has 2 hard drives in it, which are mirrored. So in other words, it's you know, they're 2 4 terabyte drives, for example, right? They're each a copy of 4 terabytes. I don't have a total space of 4 terabytes or of 8 terabytes. I have 4.
Right.
And every time I write to the drive, it writes to both drives, right? And then I back that drive up to another 4 terabyte drive that goes off site. You could do it on the cloud, but once you get into terabytes, it gets a little expensive and impractical to do that.
Right.
So
So
the point is, on my NASs, I have a tendency to just use rotational drives because I can get a lot bigger drive for the cache.
So
well, they're super cheap. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about just video for a minute?
Sure.
We
Please.
want to pick your brain if you're okay with that. We're not getting a lot of questions from the people watching, but so this actually might be helpful to me. So because I deal with such huge amounts of data, because I'm shooting in high, you know, ultra high definition, it takes up a lot of space. And so is there a device where you can put 10 drives into it and have everything accessible all at once on one of these NAS network things? Or I mean, are you aware of one? Because you're talking about 4 terabytes. That's not even half.
That's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't shoot a lot of video, so I don't have a huge need for storage. But the principle is, yes, you could extend that. I mean, think about, you know, like the news station in your town. They shoot video, you know, terabytes of video probably every day. And yeah, there are arrays that can provide massive amounts of storage that are accessible.
It would probably be completely unaffordable to someone like me who doesn't make anything.
Not necessarily. NASA's are pretty cheap, and it depends on how much you're talking about. And again, that's sort of an IT conversation. But
Yeah.
there are ways to provide massive amounts of storage and provide, like I said, redundancy. I could set that up as 2 individual drives and have 8 terabytes. I choose to mirror it for safety. In other words, my primary concern is having somewhere to store it. My secondary concern is making sure that I don't lose any data ever for any reason. So it mirrors there, and I back that up.
Yeah, because
but
the chances of both drives failing at the same time is next to nothing. So, but the problem for me is I need to have not just all that storage, but I would prefer to have it accessible. That's the problem.
All of it, yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. Historically, when disks were expensive and you had a lot of data that was the kind of thing that you would write once and maybe never look at. Think about like backing up your, storing your old bank statements or something, right? You don't necessarily have everything you ever have in your primary file cabinet, right? 3-4 years down the line, maybe it goes in a box, and the box goes in the closet because you don't need to access it. And if you do, it's not a big deal to go into the archive. Tape drive was the old way of doing that, right? With data, right? The stuff you need now goes on disk, and the stuff that's backed up for permanent archive that you probably maybe never look at or not look at very often goes on a tape. If you need, 100 terabytes available at all times, you got to pay the piper and buy the appropriate hardware to do that. But it does exist. And the good news is disks are cheap, right? Disk space is probably cheaper than it's ever been. I'm talking about, spinning disks, right? And if you need something fast, you can use, what do you call it? Solid state drives. My computer here runs a solid state drive for the boot drive. And basically everything else goes on the NAS. But I also have a rotational drive in here for the stuff that you need to store, but you don't need to be fast, right? To really wonk out on IT stuff, one of the issues you run into with solid state is they actually wear out, believe it or not. You want to minimize the number of writes to those things. So for your boot drive, which is read heavy, write light, right? And you want speed, that's what you use that for. For everything else, you generally use spinning disks or something even slower or cheaper. Tape drives used to be cheaper. I imagine tape drives now are probably more expensive than spinning disks. I'm not sure, but nobody uses them anymore, right? The hard drives are super cheap. Yeah.
They're probably not very reliable nowadays either compared to what we have accessible to us.
Well, that's the problem with any tape medium in general is the tape physically degrades. Hard drives have a lifetime too, but hard drives can tell when they're going bad. They're a lot more robust physically than tapes are in general. But you do need to change drives every once in a while. For most people, I think you need more capacity sooner than your drive physically wears out. But that's true as well. But it sounds, John, like you need a NAS with some massive hard drives on it, and they make such things. They're not terribly expensive. We can talk about that in your therapy session after this video.
Yeah.
Get you a bottle of wine.
Okay, I can get on board with that, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's just the physical part, right? That's actually the easy part, John. The easy part is drives are cheap. They make NASs for this stuff. I like the Synology NASs. Go Google it. We can talk about it later. They're fantastic. But even if you had one big volume with all your stuff on it, you still have the same problem that everything's files in folders. What you need is some way of storing more than one piece of information or whatever will fit in the folder and file name, right? File can only be in one folder, right? You need tags and some other way of describing information. And you need software that makes it accessible, right? Obviously, you wouldn't browse through each file and look for it, right? What the software does is it basically keeps a cached copy of all of your collection's metadata and allows you to search. That's how Digicam works. It reads all the files in, keeps its own database, and then it searches its own database.
So it's quicker that way, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. It doesn't physically go look at everything. What it does is it reads the collection once, and then whenever anything is changed, it updates its database. But it has its own database, or cache if you really want to be nerdy about it. I use Windows Live Photo Gallery because that's what I used when I first started, and the interface on it's really great. They don't make it anymore. It's been end of life for over 10 years, and I keep trying to get off it, and I can't find something I like better. If I had to start, well, they each have their problems is the issue. I mean, we could talk more about the tag hierarchy if you want, but I think for a lot of people, the real question is, what system do you choose to manage that collection, that database?
Right.
And they each have their trade-offs. Microsoft was great. It came free with Windows. It worked really well. I really liked the interface. It made it really easy to search and do things. And when you get into really complicated queries, it actually does that really well. Digicam is great. I just started playing with that recently because, you know, I keep telling myself I've got to move off of Windows Live Photo Gallery. And the issue you run into is moving stuff from one to the other. It can introduce problems, and in some cases, data loss, metadata loss. You won't lose the picture. You'll lose the way certain tags are structured or the way people tags work. There's technical issues moving from one to the other. But, you know, if I was starting today and if I were a professional, most professionals, I think, use Lightroom because it's reasonably priced. It works really well. You've got the support of Adobe. Adobe's not going anywhere. And if you can't trust Adobe, who can you trust in terms of, you know, betting on something? The problem with open source is, you know, you get open source quality because people are doing it for free. It's like JMRI, you know, versus like rail, you know, what do they call it? Train controller. Train controller is made by a guy in Germany and it costs $600 and it works great. You get great support. JMRI is free and you get less great support and it's pretty good. It's a trade-off either way.
When JMRI works, it's great.
JMRI is really great. You know, we have this discussion all the time, John, but you know, for the price, it's amazing. It's actually very well, you know, I'm a software engineer. I will tell you, it is very well designed and very well built. But the support and development you get from a open source software project just has different incentives than a commercial project. So for example, again, the photo stuff, Windows Live Photo Gallery was something that Microsoft made about, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago now, when, you know, the internet was new, social media was new, and they wanted to be in that space of people organize photos and whatever. And they weren't even thinking, hey, you'll store them in our cloud. But they wanted to be part of that. And then at some point, for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into, they realized they don't want to do that anymore and they stopped making it. Okay. So now for a lot of people who have used that, their collection is trapped in that. And let's say, for example, you can't get it to run on your machine or you can't download it. Let's say your computer blows up and now you can't reinstall it. How do you access your photos, right? So something like Digicam that's more open source, theoretically, as long as the project survives, you'll have some way of doing it. It's not going to disappear tomorrow because they don't feel like doing it anymore. Sometimes that happens with open source. The project dies and whatever. But generally speaking, it's not for commercial reasons. It's not because, hey, we can't make money doing this. That's not why they're in it in the first place. Microsoft didn't want it, I think, for privacy reasons and a variety of other things. But the point is it disappeared. Google Picasa is another one that everybody loved. It was actually really good. I never used it, but in a lot of research I've done, people are like, oh my God, this was so great and I can't use it anymore and blah, 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 blah. They were abandoned by Google because it didn't make sense for Google to do it anymore. Now, you can make the same argument for Lightroom, I suppose, but Lightroom's been around a long time and I don't think Adobe's going anywhere. That's what they do is, you know, photo management, video, media management for professionals. And so, you know, if I had to start today, that's what I would use is Lightroom. The thing is going from one to the other. But if you start with one and you use that for everything, works really well. Adobe's pretty good. I would say that's probably the leading commercial one out there. And as far as I can tell, Digicam, there's a couple other ones I can't remember now that are open source. But Digicam works pretty well, but the UI is not so polished. And, you know, Adobe's got to make a commercial product. It's got to be easy to use, got to be supportable. And that's really another point to be made here is that, you know, it used to be you would sort of buy software and keep it as long as you want, right? You'd get Microsoft Office 2007 and you'd run it for 15 years. Not that I ever did that. Now everything is a subscription because software needs to be maintained, right? So you can't just buy it once. You can still get Lightroom Classic, and I think you can pay one time for it and keep it as long as you want. But the fact of the matter is, if you want that software to be around for the long term, you have to pay the developers who maintain it. You know, JMRI is great because the people who do it care about it, and they do it because they care about it, not because they're in it for the money. And that's sort of the appeal of open source. But the risk is the project could die. Commercial, they're happy to keep making the software as long as you're happy to pay for it. But if not enough people pay for it, they might drop it, right? So it's a risk either way. But I think generally speaking, when you're talking about something as irreplaceable and valuable as your photo collection, right? Some of these things are priceless. My family's photographs from I have photos going back to the 1800s. Those are priceless. I have to be able to not only preserve them, but make them accessible. And that's worth a certain amount of money. I think anything like that, you've got to pay. You know, you get what you pay for. But that's a decision for you to make. You can go the open source route with something like Digicam, which will work, and there's risk in the future with that. Or you can go with something like Adobe, where you're paying subscription, and it's probably going to be around a while, but it's probably going to cost you a few more bucks than something that's free. right? JMRI, same thing, right? The beauty is that we're in an era where open source is so plentiful, and there are so many people who are skilled and passionate about it, like JMRI. I was telling you guys earlier, the club here in Sacramento, we built a CTC machine on that. We run all types of things, a programming rig, all that, right? I am so grateful to Bob Jacobson and the team and everybody who contributes to that project, because you'd either have to do it yourself, which has a cost, maybe not money, but effort, right? Or you'd have to pay some commercial software supplier like FreeVault and Train Controller to do that.
Oh,
And that
by the
gets
way,
expensive.
if you use things like JMRI, give them a donation once in a while. I do it every year at Christmas.
That's right.
Just because I keep using it.
Yeah. I use Thunderbird for email. Same thing. If there's open source projects and stuff that you use and provides value to you, make a donation. A lot of times they're nonprofits. It can be tax deductible.
Yep.
But that's a great point, Murph. If you use JMRI and it works for you, send them some money. They need to host websites. They need to host code repos. There's costs to developing software beyond people's time.
I make a joke about JMRI when it works, but it works most of the time, and I also use it all the time. So I'm really glad that it's there.
I'm grateful every day. I mean, I've been using JMRI for, God, I don't know, 20 years, however long it's been around. And, even in the last, 5 years or so, I've watched them fix little bugs and make improvements. And, again, it's very well built, and you're getting really high quality software. It's built in Java so that it runs on anything. They were really thoughtful, and it was very well engineered, like the actual code, the way they've built it, it's extensible. That's why it's been so successful, is because the engineering is so good. And they fought off a few lawsuits. Google it.
Yes.
Outstanding. And that costs money. Protecting your IP costs money.
We've heard stories about those lawsuits at lunch many times now.
Yeah. So no, good point, Murph. Contribute if you get value to the open source, because otherwise, sooner or later, they may not keep doing it.
So I'm curious, if you have your stuff on a NAS, how does the software behave? Let's say you're running it on a laptop and you walk out of NAS connection length. Does it freak out, or does it just go, oh, that's offline right now?
No, mine. Well, I do most of my stuff on a desktop that's got a really fast gigabit Ethernet connection to my NAS, so it's pretty quick. If I disconnect it, it doesn't freak out. Digicam is very good about that. You actually tell it when you say, okay, put this folder in the collection. You tell it whether it's local or it's on the network, and then it handles it appropriately. Most software now are pretty good about that. I use Windows Live Photo Gallery, so it just looks like a network drive. It just looks like a Samba share. So it's, I map a drive letter to a Samba share.
Did you say, Mike, that you're, what is it? What's it NAS? And
it stands for network attached storage.
Let's
call it a network hard drive. Let's make it simple. I can see
you said that's connected to your computer with an Ethernet?
It's actually connected to my router. It's connected to my network, and the computer's connected to the network, and then I can talk to the NAS and the hard drive through the network.
So the computer's connected to the router, and the router is like an extension. I have a router here that I had a USB drive that I plugged into the USB thing once, and that's what it was.
Same idea. It's basically the same idea. Yeah. NAS does other things besides hard drives, like it can run web servers and all types of stuff. It's basically like a server, but a lot of routers now do have that. You can just plug a USB drive right into your router, and then it shares up on the network, and then any computer on the network can see it.
You've been at my house.
Okay.
Yeah, I just said, it's right over there. Click on that one, and you drop a video up there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a hard drive that's on your network. Yeah.
I used an NAS and didn't even know it.
That's right.
Yeah. Don't be an asshole, John.
Yeah. Hey, watch the language there. We're talking about NASs here.
Right. No, it's great. You can actually see it here right behind me. This one over here, that's my cable modem. That's my internet connection. This thing here with the little pointy stuff on it in front is my router. And then the box behind it is the NAS drive with the little blinking lights on it. And then here I have a tiny little USB drive. That's the backup drive.
That's what I heard about you, Mike. Tiny little USB drive.
Look, we all have issues with the size of our USB drive, John. You're not the only one. so everybody wishes their drive was a little bigger, I think, except the people who have big drives. That's what I'm told.
Yeah. They brag about the size of their hands, I think. But anyway, but
the other users don't like it. Sometimes it's a little unwieldy if your drive's too big. That's what I've been told.
like big drives, and I cannot lie.
So yeah, there's a
Netflix a lot.
question or a comment here at the bottom. We should change the subject before it really goes down the toilet
Yeah.
here. Figuring out when in your photo taking adventures you fit in the process of tagging. Yeah, that's the key. And I think what you're advocating for on this front, Mike, is as soon as you get home, do the work. Otherwise it turns into procrastinate, and you're going to have a mountain-sized pile of work to do just to get your stuff organized, like I have now that I have this stupid idea of trying to organize my stuff now. I don't have time to do it. And I don't know if I could pay someone to do it because they wouldn't understand what we're talking about. Probably.
You gotta do the discipline. You gotta brush your teeth and exercise sometimes. The short answer, Sydney, is as soon as possible. But it's really a broader question of what your workflow is, right? Tagging is just one part of the workflow, right? You've got to get it off the device. A lot of folks advocate for, let's say you take, 100 photos today. Well, are they all going to be keepers? One of the ways you can make it easier is just get rid of the obviously bad, unusable ones right away. That's called culling, right? Cull out the bad ones, and then you have less stuff to manage. I find that it's easier to just tag it up, and I can always delete it later if I want. In other words, disks are cheap, right? I don't need the space. But you have to have some workflow that you apply at all times, and you have to be disciplined about that workflow if you want a good collection. It's just like running a library. As soon as the book comes in, it goes on the shelf. You don't throw it in the storeroom and then do 3,000 of them on a Tuesday afternoon, right? And if you do have that room with 3,000 books in it, take one, put it on the shelf, repeat. Do a little every day. I find the trick is do a little today, a little tomorrow. Next thing you know, you get a lot more done than you think.
And look how bad I am. I have on this phone here with the picture of my cat. I went to Seth Newman's place yesterday and shot videos on this phone. When I came home, I intended to put it on my archive drive with the appropriate, date and all that. Because I have to make a podcast segment out of it. And I also have to do some product spotlights with the footage on this phone. I still haven't put it on the computer. It's still sitting in the phone. So it's like I run out of time. So I think I need better time management or something. Yeah. Or maybe we need to get longer days. Maybe an act of Congress or something.
Actually, there's another thing that he's bringing up too, having a duplicate offsite NAS. I had a friend that had me take a NAS up to my mountain home, which damn near burned down. But it was a matter of, being in two places. If something disastrous happens, it's less likely to happen in both places at once. If you depend on your files for your livelihood, having it in an off-site place is a very good thing indeed. If they're really important, like family photos that you're the only caretaker of, it's important to have them in two places.
Yeah.
So
at least two. I recommend three. You want, an on-site duplicate, right? So in other words, it's on your camera, right? You copy it to a hard drive somewhere, let's say on your computer or your NAS, right? That's copy number two. And then a third copy gets backed up and taken off-site. The chances of the camera, the computer, and the off-site backup all being destroyed is pretty slim. And if you're really concerned about it, you can make multiple off-site. That's a whole other thing, is like, what's your backup strategy, right? For me, having the mirrored hard drives on my NAS, as soon as it comes off my camera, it goes right to the NAS and it's instantly copied in the room. And I still have it on the camera too, so it's really three. And then periodically, every day the NAS gets backed up to the backup drive, and then periodically I take that backup drive and I swap it with one of the offsite copies. So there's always at least one offsite copy of the entire volume. And that goes back to the multiple USB drives kind of thing, right? You're not going to have 50 drives and 50 backups and 50 offsite and times three. And, it gets unwieldy. You want to have as large a volume as you can. So like for me, the way I think about it, it's the entire thing. Right, my NAS is pretty much everything that I store, right? And then there's a copy of that in, let's call it 4 terabytes of drive. That's the local copy, right? The primary copy. I have another disk locally that's copied of that in the NAS, does it automatically. I don't have to think about it. And then daily, that gets backed up overnight to the backup drive. And then periodically, that backup drive gets rotated with multiple offsite copies. It's really a question of how much risk tolerance you need, right? Or how much threat tolerance you need, what's the likelihood of losing data, and how much you're willing to invest in time, money, and effort to manage it. For me, I have found that the NAS with the mirror drive and a backup drive is enough. Knock on wood, I've never had a failure. But if my house burned down tomorrow, there's at least one copy of it somewhere else. And so, for people who shoot video, the issue is just having large enough volumes to do that. But I think from a workflow standpoint is you want to automate it as much as possible. As soon as I take it off if I shoot it on my phone, I use an iPhone and I have iCloud. As soon as I shoot it on my phone, very quickly after it gets uploaded to iCloud, it's backed up right away. So even if I lose my phone, right? If I drop my phone or, for other reason it gets destroyed, there's probably a copy of it on iCloud, right? And then I bring it off my phone to my local storage. The only reason I don't use the cloud is because I have so much data. If you're a casual person who shoots a few photos here or there, the average sort of phone user, go pay for iCloud. It's a couple of bucks, Google version, whatever it is, and then make it automatic. You don't have to think about it. If my phone disappeared tomorrow, everything that's in iCloud is there. I can, make it accessible. If you use a Mac, it's supposed to do it on Windows, but it doesn't work. But on Mac too, you can automatically download it. So you shoot it on your phone, it uploads to the cloud, and then it shows up on all your devices, right? There's different ways of doing it. I'm an IT guy, so, running hard drives and NASs and stuff is no big deal. It's kind of fun, but for the average person, you got to find a system and a workflow that works for you, and making it as automatic and simple as possible, I think, is the key.
Wow. Yeah. Lots to think about. I don't know. We're talking about data management and workflows and stuff, and I get that because, as a matter of fact, my worst nightmare, we'll get to this comment in a minute, but I got to tell you, because you were involved with it, Mike, you were part of my worst nightmare in a sense. And what it was.
I get that a lot.
Yeah, right.
Is that standing in front of the class naked, giving a
no,
report or something?
He wasn't part of that nightmare. Good. No. So you remember, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, Sydney and I came out to your area to shoot the railroad that you were volunteering at the time. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but I shot and she shot on 2 different cameras, a lot of really good footage. We got back home and I thought that I put it onto my archive drive. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll just use those cards over again now. So I deleted everything off the cards, and it was only months later or maybe weeks, whatever. But, we get really busy, and I recorded over those cards. So I didn't even have the option to data recover on a card that had been reformatted. Because, you can, I don't know how it does it, but you can get stuff back after it's reformatted. So I lost half of my footage of that weekend shooting, which made it. I couldn't complete that project anyway because we were going to wait for Steam, which whatever.
Whole other story, yeah. Well, that explains why I never got my residual checks, John. I've been wondering where the royalties.
Yeah. Well, you didn't get them because the program never came.
Yeah. So you destroyed the original. Yeah.
Yeah. So
again, bad workflow, right? Yeah.
It was a really stupid workflow, but it had worked for me up until that time. So what I ended up doing after that, lesson learned, was I just said, you know what? I'm not going to be cheap anymore. Those cards are not that expensive. They were at first, right? An SD card of, whatever I was using at the time, 8 gigs or whatever, or 8 gigs at the time, or 12 or whatever. It wasn't a big card, but they were charging $30-$40 for the things at the time. You can get them for pennies now, or $1 or $2, whatever. But so what I did was, from that point forward, whenever I got home, I would, or even before I got home, I would take the card out of the camera, lock it, put it into a little Post-it note like this, and then fold the Post-it note up around the cards and label it. I realize this is not what we're talking about. It's a tangential topic here, but I would label it, and I have a little, I guess, set of pouches that I still have on a door that goes out to my garage. And I would put that in there until I was done with the project. So when I was done with the project, at that point, I knew I had used all the footage I had shot because I was done with my project and I found everything I needed. Then I would reuse the card. Only then. But I safeguarded my data that way, or my media that way. But that was a hard lesson to learn because I had shot or we had shot some really, really good footage on that weekend that I stupidly lost due to my own error. And it was just a really crappy lesson to learn. So, I would say word to the wise, but that's kind of a non sequitur because the wise don't need a word. A word to the non wise is to make sure that you're really careful with your card, media, if that's what you're shooting on, or also on your phone, right? Because there's an option to delete stuff off your phone. Now, the phone, I use an iPhone, and it's smart enough if you use the process in the phone, it's smart enough to keep it for 30 days. You can go and recover stuff you've deleted. But yeah, so just
I've had
saying.
similar. Yeah, no, I had a similar thing where I was traveling and I had shot some photos that day, and I got into the hotel that night and I took the photos from the camera onto my laptop. And this was before I had a NAS and all this. This was like 100 years ago. And same thing. What I used to do was the tool I used to transfer from the camera to the laptop. I think it was actually Windows Live Photo Gallery, but basically you can say transfer this stuff and then delete it from the original card, which is, from a convenience standpoint, probably what you want. There are people who make a very cogent point of saying, don't do that. Copy it over. You can always delete it later, right? Because the trouble you get into is deleting it. You deleted the original, as you'll find out in this story. So did I. I transferred it to my laptop, and literally like 10 seconds after I transferred it, the hard drive on the laptop crashed and I lost everything. It had been deleted from the camera because I had just copied it to the laptop, and then the hard drive on the laptop died, and I lost a couple of days worth of photos on a trip. And it was devastating. So the lesson here is don't delete data until you have to. And, with cameras, with cards, it's real easy because you can pull the card out of the camera or plug it in, I guess, but you basically pull everything off and just leave it on there. Like I used to do that with my GoPro when I would go, kayaking or whatever, do outdoor stuff. I would shoot with the camera and then I would come home and dump the card, but I wouldn't delete the card until I used the camera again. So I didn't necessarily do it every day. Most of the time it was sort of a weekly activity for me. So worst case scenario, even if I lost everything else in my house burned down, assuming I still had the camera and the card, everything I had on there was there. And then what I would do is the next time I went to go out with that camera, on that morning, I would set the date on the camera, because I had that trouble with it too. Sometimes the battery would die, I would lose the date, and then you'd get weird dates. I'd set the date, and then I would wipe the card or stick a new card in it. But generally speaking, I would format the card. And that forced me to say, do I really have this? Am I sure this is backed up? And it sounds like you ran into basically the same thing, but that's the workflow. The workflow is I don't dump the camera until the next time I use it. Now with phones, it's a little harder and it's a little different, but the general principle is never delete the original until you're sure you've got 3 backup copies somewhere else, right? It gets tough with phones because, especially with iPhones and Windows, they really don't like to play very well. It's gotten better, but for a long time, I plugged the phone into the machine over USB, and then I would just dump the stuff. And I used to just delete it when I copy, because as soon as it's on the NAS, I've got at least 2 copies. But theoretically, I could move it to the NAS and then, power surge, the NAS gets hosed, both drives are shot, and I don't have an offsite backup yet, right? So the key is don't delete the original until you've got the other things, and have a workflow that makes that easy. That's, sort of the point I was getting at earlier. What ideally I would want is sort of an automated cloud backup like iCloud. But the problem is not every device, like my GoPro, doesn't talk to that, right? I guess there's ways you could do it, but the phone is built to do that. Apple is, in the business of selling you iCloud, so it works with their devices and so forth. But I don't want to be dependent on one vendor. If I want to get a different phone tomorrow, I don't want to have my whole collection on iCloud. Now, what do I do with a massive collection on a provider I don't want to use anymore? That's why I do my own IT for that kind of thing. So it sounds like you're kind of in the same boat. You've got massive amounts of data. It's too expensive to do it in the cloud. I think we should talk about NASAs the next time we're shooting the breeze. But hard drives are cheap. It's never been easier. The Synology NASAs that I like, they're cheap. They're really easy to use. And you can get them as big and expensive as you want. But speaking about workflow, the key is more about workflow. Let's assume for a second we have the IT solved. What does your workflow look like? There was a question earlier I saw about, versioned backups and things. I would say a key tenet of any workflow is to never touch the original, right? You shoot, a video with your camera, and let's say maybe you chop some clips out of that or you do some editing on it. Well, keep the original, make a copy, right? It's not a versioned backup per se. That is an artifact of your workflow. is we take the original and then we produce some other copy that's a derivative of that. You never edit your original stuff. You keep the original, and then here's the cropped version of the picture or the color corrected or whatever. And so your workflow should be a series of steps, like a flow chart. Here's the original, here's my processing, workflow, and then here's my physical storage process and all of that. That should all be part of your workflow. And I would say never touch your original if you can. The problem used to be the originals are huge and disk space was expensive, and you'd have to say, well, do I really need this? And that's where culling comes in, right? If you shoot some video that's, out of focus or not usable, just delete it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I added to my workflow, was keeping the cards around till I knew I was done with the project. And boy, was that a lifesaver. I never had made that mistake again, because you learn a lesson like that once, because that's a lot of work that was just lost through an act of basic stupidity of thinking I had transferred it, but I didn't really. Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah. And that's not a bad idea, because SD cards also, which is the medium that my stuff goes on as an original, as we're calling it, you can store millions of those things and it won't take up much space either. Of course, they do also degrade over time. So it's like, you may or may not lose it, but by then you have it backed up into your archive drives or whatever.
Redundancy is key. Yeah, it only needs to survive the backup time, right? For me, I take photos off the device, goes on my NAS, and as soon as it's on my NAS, I immediately have 3 copies. I have the original copy and now 2 copies on the mirrored drives. And then within 24 hours, I have the backup copy, and within some time frame, periodically, that gets backed up offsite. Each of those steps provides redundancy and security for different concerns. Getting it off the device, the first copy is I lose my phone, for whatever reason that gets destroyed, I have something. If you're going to do that, put it on a drive that's automatically mirrored, you instantly get drive redundancy for free. That's cheap. The backup happens every day. I don't have to think about it. It happens automatically. And then every once in a while, I got to swap drives physically off site. If you had a cloud connection with a server somewhere, you could do that way. It doesn't have to be physical drives. The important thing is to have 3 copies of the data. Yeah, because the chances of 3 happening are pretty slim.
Yeah, I think in my case, I do need physical drives, because that cloud storage, for the amount of space I would need, is just going to be cost prohibitive probably. So unless I open 1,200 Google accounts and use the 15 gigs on all of those, but then you have to have a whole different way of searching those, and that's just stupid. So,
well, but that's your archive, right? That's not meant to be searchable. That's meant to be, holy crap, everything else has been destroyed. Go get a copy of it. The real issue you run into is network bandwidth. If you've got, 1,000 terabytes to upload, how long would that take on your crappy cable connection, right? Even if you have a lightning fast fiber somewhere, it's still just a massive amount of data to move. There's also privacy concerns and security. There may be things in your photos, IP or whatever privacy reasons you don't want it getting out there, right? Everybody who posts their stuff to Facebook is really surprised when it shows up on copy groups and things, So yeah, I mean, cloud storage works for, I would say, low to medium volumes. But with any of this stuff, and with anything in general, if you've got a problem, look at what the professionals who have the same problem do, right? What does your local television studio do? What does Netflix do? How does Netflix manage their IP? You want to talk about massive video, right? How many videos and movies and shows and, movie production companies, right? They go shoot a bunch of movie stuff. It's hours and hours of video and clips and cuts and takes and all these other things. You've got to have a way of managing massive stuff. And, obviously not everybody can afford. I mean, there's bespoke, $1 million systems that do these things. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm saying is find somewhere between what you need and how it's done at the most demanding level for something that's manageable for you. And the beauty is IT now is so cheap. We have all these services. This would not have been possible, 20, 30 years ago, at least not in a cost-effective way. So it sounds like to me, John, you need some bigger hard drives and NAS and some way to do it. This is the cheapest, best way I've found to do it. Works really well. I'm still running a 10-year-old NAS or something. I think I paid, $200-300 for that NAS, and drives are like $100. They're really not, they get cheaper every year. It's really about the workflow. It's about having a sane way of, no matter what you do, in other words, what you shoot, how much of it you do, is a repeatable, robust process that ensures you never lose data. Yeah. And secondarily, I would say that it's accessible, right? Because if you shoot it, you can't find it. That doesn't matter either. So to me, the organization is almost more important, because that's harder. right? You can always find a bigger hard drive. You can always find some pointy-headed guy like me to tell you what to do with stuff that has Ethernet ports on it. But the question is, how do you organize it? How do you actually take 10,000 videos and make them searchable, and not just for you, but for somebody else later down the line?
Yeah. And for me, it's going to be solving one thing at a time. And I think the first thing I'm going to solve is being able to access more than 2 years of my archive at one time. Because frankly, if we talk about shooting in places like Roaring Camp or Niles Canyon, where I've gone to both of those places for decades now, and if I'm doing a video about Niles Canyon, I want some of that old stuff without having to, hot swap drive. Oh, was it this year? Oh, let's see. Oh no. Then you see something else and you're like, oh,
Right,
what
it's
did I
not
shoot on
accessible.
that?
Mhm.
It's just a
Totally.
rabbit hole that takes forever to find stuff the way it's set up now. So anyway,
Yeah.
sir, I don't see a lot of questions coming in. So I think we're going to wrap this because we're almost out of time anyway. But I do want to mention, and this is something I meant to do, but I keep forgetting, but he's here. So I'm going to mention it now. Our friend Heath, that's Humanity Junction, goes on in about 8.5 minutes. He's going to do a live show. He does a live show after, or, if we run over, it's sometimes simultaneous to the end of our live show. So everybody take a look at Humanity Junction. I don't know what he's going to be talking about tonight, but Heath is a great guy and does a fun show, and probably not as great or as fun as we've had a time with you here, Mike, but it'll be good.
I'm sure it's at least as fun as we had today.
I hope so. So I do want to thank you, Mike, for coming. I always enjoy talking. It's a lot of information, obviously, and a lot to take in. But you've given me a lot to think about. And, Murph didn't fall asleep, so it must have been really interesting.
We got to Symlink, so he's happy,
That's right. I got to mention that just to bewilder people.
Nothing wakes me up like Linux file system concepts.
But I know what SimCity is. Is it related to that? Or
no, you can actually do it on a Mac too. So
what, SimCity?
No, Symlinks.
Oh, well, I'll have to figure out what that is some other time, because
baby steps, Murph. Baby steps for John.
Yeah, it just went like this.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, also I want to thank everybody else who watched, and for our chat moderators who keep stuff on track. And next month this is interesting. Next month we're going to be talking to a guy named Paul Hobbs from New Zealand. So that should be interesting. I don't remember the topic. It may be that we didn't choose a topic yet, but Paul's an interesting guy, and he comes out to our PCR conventions. That's where I got this idea to have him on. And we talked at the PCR convention. So it should be interesting. He knows a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. So thank you very much, Mike.
Take care, Mike.
And everybody else, thank you much. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.